Today we have to start with the budget and the fiscal policy. So let us just complete the growth models quickly, and then we start with today's topic, budget and fiscal policy after that. So in the growth models, when we discuss, the first is Harrod-Domar. Harrod-Domar we completed last time. In Harrod-Domar, if you look at the simplified equation, it is growth is equal to investment divided by ICOR. ICOR is fixed in the short run. So since ICOR doesn't change in the short run, if we want to increase the growth rate, the only option is to opt for higher investment. So we should invest more. What government is doing right now, if you look at the post-COVID strategy, recently there was an interview of finance minister in which she was explaining what has been India's course in the last 2.5 years, and it was actually one of her better interviews. So she was talking about some of the core economic terminologies. So she was saying that if we give money to people for consumption, after COVID, we had 2-3 strategies. UK opted for consumption, that give money to people, mobilize the economy, put cash into economy, and that is how you recover. So UK opted for that. But we studied that if we opt for consumption, the multiplier is something like 0.9 to 1. Whatever we spend, the economic growth increases only by that much. Okay, so for example, if government spend additional 2% of GDP, GDP grows by 2%. Okay. Then she said, however, in our calculations, we found if we spend this money alternatively on infrastructure, developing the transport, communication, etc., then the multiplier is 3 to 4 times. Means government spent additional 1% of GDP, the economy gets a boom of about, for each 1%, our economy gets boom of 3% roughly. Okay. So that is why she said that initially our focus was on consumption. First, we put some cash into economy, we help people to consume more. But after that, eventually, what we opted for was investment. So for last 2-3 years, if you see the government's approach, our capital expenditure is increasing significantly. It used to be very, very poor in India, but now it is respectable. Okay? It is not still desirable, but it is still at respectable, good level. And it is highest in our history. For last 2 years, we have breached the previous highest levels. Clear? So from where all of that is coming from? So there are some concepts of multiplier also. So what India is doing also here for the growth, we are not looking too much at the efficiency, etc. That also, of course, improve with infrastructure, but most important target is investment. Okay. So investment leads to growth without any doubt. And there is a direct and proportional relationship. If you increase investment by 10%, growth also increases by 10%. Okay. There is a direct relationship. Means if growth was 6%, it will increase to 6.6%. Let us say investment is 25% in infrastructure or anywhere. We increase this by 10%, we make it 27.5. You will also notice this will also be same, 6.6, 10% change here. So this is what we mean by direct and proportional relationship. I'm not saying you make it from 25 to 35, this becomes 6 to 16. Okay, that's not how you can compute 10%. 10% would be like this. Okay, sometimes students unnecessarily confuse. If I say 10% increase in investment means 10% increase in growth. It's not 25 to 35 and 6 to 16. That's of course not correct. Now, are we clear here? So this was about Harrod-Domar. Now, if we look at some of the other growth models very quickly, then one of the growth model is big push model. One of the growth model is balanced growth model. Another model is Lewis model. You can write the names first, right? Balanced growth model. Okay. Growth model. Then big push model. Big push model. Okay. Then Lewis model. LEWIS, Lewis model. Okay. There is one more Rosto, 5 stages of growth. Rosto, 5 stages of growth. एक और मॉडल होता है सोलो स्वैन, बट दैट इज वेरी वेरी टेक्निकल. I do not think UPSC में पूछा जाएगा, but आपको नाम पता हो तो not bad. Okay, just write the name. We will not discuss it. Solo swan. Not models. Solo swan model. It is actually considered as the more advanced version of Harrod-Domar. It is also a very popular model, but very complex, very technical. Okay. Are we clear with the names? So, right, first about balanced growth model. We'll write just one line each. We'll keep them very objective because in mains question will not come on this. In PT, if a question comes, it will be very, very objective. So, right, we should invest in all the sectors / majority of sectors. We should invest in all the sectors / majority of sectors. We can't invest in all, at least majority you should invest. We should invest in all the sectors or majority of sectors simultaneously. Point number 2, there is a lot of interdependence. There's a lot of interdependence between the sectors. There is a lot of interdependence between the sectors. And online students, good morning. You are wishing good morning, sir. I hope you're able to catch up now. Okay. Now, second point was that there is interlinkages. Can you tell me the formal term for this? इसको formally क्या बोला जाता है? This is also written in your syllabus. ये आपके syllabus में भी लिखा है ये term जो है. Just think for few seconds, then of course I will tell. In case you can't figure it out. Agriculture के section में लिखा है. हाँ बोलिए. नहीं इंक्लूसिव ग्रोथ नहीं है ये. इंटरडिपेंडेंस को इंक्लूसिव ग्रोथ से लिंक भी नहीं है. लिखिए बैकवर्ड फॉरवर्ड लिंकेजेस ब्रैकेट में लिखिए. दिस इज कॉल्ड बैकवर्ड फॉरवर्ड लिंकेजेस. और अपस्ट्रीम डाउनस्ट्रीम रिक्वायरमेंट इंडस्ट्री में पढ़ते हैं. Backward forward linkages or upstream downstream requirements. Both are same. Clear? So since every sector depends upon others, everything should grow simultaneously. If we focus only on few sectors, then eventually they will come to a plateau. They will stagnate because they are not getting support from others. You cannot grow your car industry if steel industry is not developed. Okay, if your tire industry is not developed, you cannot develop a domestic car industry. So, for example, you cannot develop a tire industry if your rubber industry is not developed. So that is how we should look at the things. So this is what the balanced growth model talks about. हम मॉडल में नहीं जा रहे हैं, हम उसके जो ऑब्जेक्टिव 2-3 पॉइंट है वही लिखेंगे. पीटी में इसी तरह से पूछा जाएगा. Okay? एक पॉइंट और लिख सकते हैं, राइट? If we focus on few sectors, then it will come to a plateau. And stop developing further. Okay, this is a danger if we do not follow this approach. Now, a very good counter to this approach, that is big push model. Next, big push model. You can also write the names here. The balanced growth model is given by Ragnar Nurkse. इस तरह के क्वेश्चन पूछे नहीं जा रहे हैं, बट 90s में इस तरह के क्वेश्चन पूछे गए हैं. सो वन नेवर नो, दे मे आस्क यू मैच द फॉलोइंग टाइप क्वेश्चन. Ragnar Nurkse, Nurkse. Okay, not big push, the balanced growth. And big push is Rodenstein-Roden. This is big push. Herodomer नहीं दिया था, so over the names were in the name itself. Lewis is by Lewis, so yes, and Rosto is by Rosto. That is also a name. Anyways, now coming back to it, right? This model argued balanced growth model is good, but not practical. This model argued balanced growth model is good, but not practical for developing countries. Next point. Okay, so he's arguing that for other countries who can afford to invest everywhere, for them it is good. It is a good approach. There is nothing wrong with the approach, but some countries do not have money to invest everywhere. What they should do? This is what they are saying. They're not actually attacking each other, but they're just talking about applicability of each other's model. So next point. They do not have enough resources to invest. They do not have enough resources to invest significantly in many places or many sectors. Enough resources to invest significantly in many sectors. Clear? Now, he basically uses an analogy from physics, and that is the reason why the name is Big Push. And by the way, a lot of physics analogy you will see in economics, because this subject is developed by almost exclusively by people who had science background. Okay, economics may, I mean, if you look at how many people who have done well in economics had science background, it will be almost like 90-95%. या तो मैथमेटिशियंस रहे हैं या फिजिसिस्ट रहे हैं सब. Okay, कॉमर्स पढ़ के किसी ने इकोनॉमिक्स में कोई कुछ नहीं किया somehow. Next point is the reason why it is called Big Push. You do not have to write as of now. Just understand there is a law of inertia. So he is arguing if something is at inertia, something is at standstill, you need to apply a lot of force to make it moving. But once it is moving, you can keep it moving with very less force. So he is arguing economy requires a big push when you are beginning with the growth. So he is arguing in developing countries, and particularly countries which are just gaining independence, these are 60s model. So they're arguing that countries which are gaining independence are adopting new development models. They will find a problem that their economy is at inertia, and that is why it requires a big push. And you cannot provide big push in many places simultaneously. You need to gather all your force and get behind something and push it. Once it is moving, you can keep it moving with very less force, then focus on something else. That is the approach. Okay. So, right? It is like you choose where you invest rather than putting money everywhere. You choose whether you want agriculture-based growth. You choose whether you want industry-based growth, whether you want labor-based growth, what kind of growth you want. You have to choose. You can't just put money everywhere. Today, we can afford to do so because we have resources. But in 50s, we did not have resources. This was the problem. So, right? Most of poor countries have their economy in inertia / stagnation. Economy में हम stagnation बोलेंगे. Most of the poor countries have their economy at stagnation. In bracket, you can write inertia. And we need a big push to transform. We need a big push to transform these economies / sectors. We need a big push to transform these economies or sector. Okay. And that is not affordable in balanced approach. That is not affordable in balanced approach. So what is the idea? Now let us wind it up, right? Last line. Hence, developing countries should choose a few sectors. Hence, developing countries should choose a few sectors and try to transform them. So by the way, until recently, India's approach has always been big push. Okay, हमारी approach हमेशा से big push रही है. So you can write, for example, heavy industry. For example, heavy industries in 50s. So what did we focus on? Heavy industry in India. Mahalanobis model. Before that, Nehruvian approach. Everywhere we focused on heavy industry, infrastructure. Okay, mining. These were the initial approaches. Then late 60s and 70s, agriculture, green revolution. Right. And the next line, right? Agriculture. In agriculture also, particularly what type? Food grains. Food grains. In bracket, you can write food grains. So this was late 60s and 70s. Okay. 80s, there was hardly any clear focus anywhere. And 70s was also a relatively bad decade for us. And then since then, you can say in 90s, we started focusing on industry, but later on, we started focusing on services because we were getting better returns from there. Then the first decade, we continued with services, but we simultaneously invested in other areas also. We can't say exclusively, but still focus was services. What is the focus today? Abhi hamara kya focus hai? Industry. Industry or manufacturing is our focus, but still, we are not today opting for this type of model. We are investing everywhere simultaneously because today we can afford. We have at least a sizable economy. So this is what we can see the application of this in Indian economy. Okay? So Harrod-Domar to of course किसी भी economy में हमेशा ही use होता है. So we do not have to explicitly talk about that. Balanced growth model हमने अब use करना शुरू किया है. पहले हमेशा big push था. Lewis model. Right. This was designed specifically for developing countries. Lewis ने तो इंडिया ही के लिए ही लिखा था ये, by the way, but this was designed specifically for developing countries. So he defined some conditions that if these conditions are in your economy, you should use this model. So write conditions. Point number 1, backward primary sector with negligible growth, and relatively better secondary sector with low growth. Second, presence of disguised unemployment in primary sector. Presence of disguised unemployment in primary sectors. Okay, I'm replying to one online student right now. You are saying that startups are our focus. See, startup is not a sector. Startup is a type of firm. So startup you can't answer as such. Startup की जगह अगर आप इसको entrepreneurship या innovation लिखेंगे तो थोड़ा better होगा. But even if you use startup, you can't say, or even the innovation, you can't say this is a sector. If you are asking sector, you should keep it within the sectors. Okay. You can write in general that our approach is favoring entrepreneurship. And you are saying self-reliance. Self-reliance is our economic policy. वो ठीक है, वो एक अलग मैटर है. I'm not asking for economic policy. I was asking what is our focus area. Anyways, answer is correct. I will come to this self-reliance startup in international trade. Okay, I will talk about self-reliance. Self-reliance का reason international trade है. Okay, globalization is the topic with which self-reliance should be linked. The world is entering a phase of deglobalization, and in deglobalization, the international supply chains are not reliable, and that is why we opt for self-reliance. Anyways, I will come to it. Now, Lewis model. So second point was disguised unemployment in primary sector. What is disguised unemployment? Can you tell me? Correct. Okay. Where there are more people than how many required. Okay. Correct. बिल्कुल. मैं वही, I was just coming to that technically you should define this as MPL equal to 0. Marginal productivity of labor to be 0. आप ये MPL मत लिखना एग्जाम में, it's a technical term, but you can write marginal productivity if ever. पूछा भी नहीं जाएगा. PT क्वेश्चन में आ सकता है. They will ask you disguised unemployment and they mention marginal productivity. ऐसे ही आएगा. They will not ask you in mains. And if you ever want to talk about it, never write these kind of short forms of very technical terms. Okay, मैंने लिख दिया है, but avoid it. So you can write in bracket marginal productivity of labor equals 0. This is also how we define. Marginal means edge, the next or the last. The last labor we have hired is not contributing anything, or the next labor we are going to hire is not contributing. So that is what it means. So Lewis argued if your economy has these two conditions, that your primary sector is poor, backward, no growth with MPL 0, and a slow growing, let us say, secondary sector or manufacturing, then you need to follow my model, or then you can benefit from my model. That was the idea. What is the model now? Write suggestions. Right. Encourage migration of labor from primary to secondary sector. Encourage migration of labor from primary to secondary sector. Okay, now his argument is this does not affect the agriculture production because over there we had extra people. In a farm where only 3 people are required, 7 people are working. We can easily free up 7 people from 3 to 4 people from this farm. Output will not be affected. So even if we take away some people, 3 to 4 people from this farm, it will not affect the agriculture output, but these people will be productive in the new sector. So it doesn't negatively affect agriculture output, and it improves productivity rather. It improves the per capita income of the remaining people in agriculture. So it benefits the agriculture and also benefits the manufacturing. So that was the idea, right? It benefits, next point, it benefits the remaining people in agriculture, okay, as their per capita income will increase. This benefits remaining people in agriculture while total output remains same. While total output remains same. Next, this benefits secondary sector through endless supply of cheap labor. Through endless supply of cheap or affordable labor. Okay, nowadays we do not use the word cheap labor. Government documents everywhere the cheap is getting replaced with affordable. Okay? But पुरानी books में, पुरानी notes में होता था, cheap labor was a term that was used. Okay? So ये बहुत पुराना मॉडल है इसलिए हमने cheap use किया, but otherwise we do not use it today. So they will get endless supply of cheap labor. Now there is one condition also. Okay, this is what the model benefits. Next point, right? One important condition is that the inflation should be controlled. Inflation should be controlled. And cost of living should not rise. And cost of living should not rise. Okay, if we want this model to work, then cost of living should not increase. This is the requirement. नहीं कैसे होगा वो नहीं कह रहे, वो ये कह रहे करना पड़ेगा, नहीं तो ये मॉडल काम नहीं करेगा. This is requirement. He's not saying that this will control inflation. He's not arguing that. He's saying if you are not able to control inflation, this model will not work. This model is entirely based on low-cost manufacturing. Low-cost manufacturing will work if you keep your labor cost under control. And labor cost will be kept under control when cost of living is under control. If your cost of living increases a lot, then what will happen? Then these people will ask for more wages in urban areas, and then it will no longer be low-cost manufacturing. So what India did in order to make Lewis model work, we opted for regional centers. We never created our big PSUs in any of the city. We created them in rural areas. And we created them far away from each other so that it doesn't lead to aggregation of people in one area. Okay? And also there was objective of balanced regional growth, so that was compatible with that also. So dono objective ko wo fulfill karta hai. So while there were plants in Punjab at Kapurthala, there were plants in Bengal at Durgapur, there were also plants in let us say Odisha at Raurkela, and similarly Warangal in Andhra Pradesh, and everywhere else. Likewise there were factories and plants, Sangli in Maharashtra. So सब जगह PSUs इस तरह से distribute किए. And all of these were rural areas. These were villages before factories were established. They became major industrial towns later on because there were big PSUs there, and all other private sector companies came nearby. So अभी अगर हम उन areas को देखें तो उसमें कुछ areas city हैं, but at that time they were not even a town. At that time they were small villages. So we opened our factory in villages to control the cost of living. Clear? And also you do not allow the people to aggregate in one place, because if that happens, then rent increases, then everything else increases. So we opted for something like that, and there were many more strategies to control inflation. So in the Mahalanobis model, in the subsequent years, our approach was based on low-cost manufacturing also. Clear? So this is all about growth models. There is one Rostov model. इसको आप पढ़ के कोशिश करना, clear हो जाएगा. It's a very simple analogy which even a class 6 student can understand frankly. इसमें कुछ है नहीं. I do not even understand why this is being taught. मतलब इसमें कुछ ना तो पढ़ाने जैसा है ना पढ़ने जैसा है. He simply compared the growth of economy with flight of aircraft. That aircraft is first on ground, economy is also at stagnation. Aircraft then prepares for takeoff. Okay, so economy also takes time to take off, and it requires a lot of fuel, lot of investment in the beginning, and then like flight takes off, economy takes off. In the beginning, growth is slow, and then after a time it gains maturity. तो उतना ही इसमें. So इसमें कुछ लॉजिक या बहुत ज्यादा कुछ है नहीं. I mean, Anybody can come up with such analogies, but ये अपने टाइम का बहुत पॉपुलर मॉडल है for some reason. At those days, people found it to be something a wonderful idea. So इस पे क्वेश्चन आया है that which of the following is one of the Rostow stages. Okay, so इस 90s में इस तरह के क्वेश्चन ग्रोथ मॉडल्स पे डायरेक्ट आए हैं. इवन इन द अर्ली 2000, आई थिंक 2002 में भी एक क्वेश्चन इस टाइप का आया ग्रोथ मॉडल. तो उसके बाद से थ्योरी में क्वेश्चंस कम हो गए बहुत. पहले थ्योरी पे डायरेक्ट क्वेश्चन आते थे. Now, this is all about growth models, and this completes the topic. Now, next topic will be the budget and the fiscal policy. Okay, budget and fiscal policy. So first of all, the scheme of the budget. Okay, so write down accounting system. What you have missed. Mention the previous line, I'll talk about what you are asking for. Now, budget and fiscal policy, in that, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the accounting system. In the accounting system, let us first talk about the Consolidated Fund of India. Consolidated Fund of India. Right. It is statement, budget is statement of consolidated fund. Budget is statement of consolidated fund. Okay, so सबने पढ़ा है आर्टिकल 112 that budget is technically not even budget, it is annual financial statement. तो किसका स्टेटमेंट है? किसी अकाउंट का स्टेटमेंट होगा. That account is consolidated fund. Okay, so that account budget is statement of consolidated fund. Next point. Officially, we do not have something called treasury, but this is almost like treasury. Okay? So सरकारी खजाना जब जो बोला जाता है, that consolidated fund of India is सरकारी खजाना. Okay? So right, it acts like treasury. It acts like treasury. Next, executive can use the money. Executive, which is the cabinet, can use the money only after approval from legislature. Only after approval from legislature. Okay, so executive is in charge of it, but legislature is custodian of it. Okay, so in order to withdraw, right, next one, in order to withdraw even a single rupee, parliamentary approval is required. In order to withdraw even a single rupee, parliamentary approval is required. And what is budget essentially? Budget वही है, सारा साल हमें कितना withdraw करना है वो हम पहले ही approve करा लेते हैं, so that government can work efficiently and smoothly. Okay, even to withdraw single rupee, government has to take approval of parliament. So parliament का approval पूरे साल के लिए हम पहले ही ले लेते हैं. We take that in advance, and that essentially is budget. Clear? So budget is always for the coming year that is going to come. And for example, the budget that is now issued is for 24-25. Okay, although it is interim budget, the full budget will be released later, but still, whatever was issued, it was for 24-25. So although it is issued in 23-24 financial year, but it is issued for next year. We take every approval in advance because otherwise the system will fail. Government will not be able to spend rupee. In addition to budget, if we want to ever withdraw money, अगर executive को पैसा चाहिए और budget में वो पहले से sanction नहीं है, तो क्या होगा उसमें? Can you tell me the constitutional provision for that? Sorry, little loud. हाँ, लेकिन उसके बाद एक appropriation bill की भी बात होती है. Okay? In addition to budget, appropriation bills are required. Okay? अगर बाद में पैसा चाहिए जो बजट में अप्रूव नहीं है, तो appropriation bill होगा. मुझे आर्टिकल्स याद नहीं है, मेरा एरिया नहीं है, but you can simply write the. I mean, I remember the important articles, but I do not remember each and every one. So, in addition to budget, if required, in addition to budget, comma, if required, appropriation bills are introduced. Appropriation bills are introduced. Okay. So, Article 112 से 115 तक ये सब financial ही, I mean, all of these are talking about the financial provisions. Then there is something called vote on account also. Okay, एक vote on account भी होता है. वो rare circumstances में तीसरा provision है पैसा निकालने का. So there are three ways in which Parliament can give money to executive from this account. One of them is budget, which is the most primary and the common source. Sometimes appropriation bills, and rarely vote on account. That is how we go for this. हाँ, ये 116 है, vote on account. Yes. Anyways, clear? ये बाद में भी आप लिख सकते हैं, constitutional provision, doesn't matter. So the consolidated fund and its role should be clear to you. Okay? And whatever government withdraw, this must be replenished. You cannot, these funds must be maintained at the level. उनको हम कभी भी कम नहीं कर सकते, हमेशा उन्हें increase कर सकते. So government cannot withdraw excessively. Every single rupee that it is taking from the fund must be returned to the fund. Okay? So through the revenue, through everything else. Next, public account of India. Public account of India. So इसमें क्या होता है? What kind of money comes into it? Right. This account includes direct liability of government to. This account includes direct liability of government to public. Public means household and private sector here. Direct liability of government to public, household or private sector. It can even be public sector, ऐसा जरूरी नहीं private sector, anything which is non-government. Okay. Household and firms. Firms private sector हो या public sector. So public account liabilities are not even considered debt. Okay. Right. Public account liabilities are not even considered debt. That is why we have called them liability. See, government is not taking loan. Government is taking deposit from you. So it's a liability for government, but not debt. In that sense, public account is there. So there is very clear terminology. We call it public account liability. Public account liability is not debt. Okay. तो इसका मतलब जो हमारी public debt होती है, whenever we say public debt or debt to GDP, that debt to GDP is always for consolidated fund, not for this fund, because over here it is not even called debt. Okay. Now, for what purpose is it is maintained? इसको किस पर्पस के लिए रखा जाता है? Right? It is maintained to promote small savings. It is maintained to provide small savings. And encourage savings. Okay. Now write examples. Example of receipts. इसमें से government expenditure कुछ नहीं करती. Government doesn't spend money from this account. Example of receipts. First, the biggest entry is PPF, Public Provident Fund. Okay. PPF, EPF, NPS, PPF, EPF, NPS, National Pension Scheme. Okay. And then post office deposits. Post office deposits. Urban people are not aware, but in rural areas, until recently, before Jan Dhan Yojana, people used to keep their money in post offices. Okay. So accounting was not, sorry, the banking was not very common in many of the rural areas. Okay. Thanks a lot. There is? Public account of India, then isn't it that it's the government was taking like a savings, whatever we are. See, the purpose of this account is to encourage savings. So government takes money from them, invest it in many areas. Okay. So they invest it into, let us say, stock market. They invest it into banks. They invest it into PSUs. But everywhere, these investments are based on fixed guarantees. Government doesn't use it for its expenditure. नहीं, ट्रेजरी बिल बिल्कुल अलग होता है. हाँ, हमें मिलता है. इसका रिटर्न हाईएस्ट होता है. पोस्ट ऑफिस का सेविंग्स अकाउंट का या जो उसका फिक्स डिपॉजिट का इंटरेस्ट है वो बैंक से ज्यादा होता है और उस पर टैक्स सेविंग्स में मिलती है. ओके. That is the benefit of Provident Fund also. Provident Fund gives you something like 8.5% interest, which is nowhere. Okay. Guaranteed interest इतना कहीं नहीं मिलता legitimate scheme में. So government has to pay very high interest here. Government doesn't use this money. Government basically just act as a fund manager for people here. क्लियर है? हाँ. और कुछ हम PSUs को लोन देते हैं फिक्स गारंटी स्पेस के थ्रू. ओके, LIC को कुछ पैसा मिल जाता है इससे. एंड सम गवर्नमेंट कंपनी, गवर्नमेंट कैन आल्सो टेक सम मनी, बट अगेन वो फिक्स गारंटी के बेसिस पे होता है. ओके, शॉर्ट टर्म. हाँ, लोगों के बिहाफ पे. गवर्नमेंट को इसमें कुछ नहीं चाहिए. गवर्नमेंट रादर पे करती है उनको एक्स्ट्रा. इंटरमीडिएरी नहीं, आप इसको फंड मैनेजर कहिए. फंड मैनेजर एक टर्म बेटर है उससे. इंटरमीडिएरी वुड मीन समथिंग एल्स. ओके, इंटरमीडिएरी नहीं है गवर्नमेंट. एनीवेज, वी आर क्लियर हियर. सो फॉर एग्जांपल सुकन्या समृद्धि योजना, फॉर एग्जांपल, ओके, दिस आल्सो यू शुड राइट. सो जितनी भी सरकारी स्कीम में पैसा लेते हैं गवर्नमेंट, वो भी इसी में आता है. सुकन्या समृद्धि योजना. देन एक और कैटेगरी के सेविंग्स होंगी, दीज आर नेशनल सेविंग सर्टिफिकेट्स. फिर इसमें बहुत सारे होते हैं. कृषि कल्याण सर्टिफिकेट, रूरल डेवलपमेंट सर्टिफिकेट्स. पहले एक इंदिरा विकास पत्र होता था. So wherever government pay fixed return, guaranteed returns, those are in public. Next is contingency. Contingency fund. एक छोटा सा होमवर्क है आपके लिए. Try to identify what is the fund size in contingency fund. Contingency fund का एक फिक्स साइज है, बाकी फंड्स का कोई फिक्स साइज नहीं है. What is the fund size? ये रिसेंटली अपडेट हुआ, इसलिए क्वेश्चन आ सकता है. कोविड के बाद इसे बढ़ाया गया. What is the fund size? So, right, government allocates money through budget. इसमें पैसा कहां से आएगा? Government allocates money through budget. So fund is always maintained at a level. Let us say that level is 20,000 crore. So 20,000 crore rupees fund will always be maintained. एक और सोर्स जिससे पैसा आ सकता है वो है प्राइम मिनिस्टर रिलीफ फंड, प्रेसिडेंट रिलीफ फंड. उनके जो डोनेशन है वो भी इसमें आ सकते हैं. If they are extra and unused after the disaster, then they can also be deposited. नहीं, वो सेपरेट अकाउंट होता है, वो उसी अकाउंट में आते हैं, बैंक अकाउंट में. बट इफ दे आर एक्सेस एंड देयर इज अ नीड हियर, देन दे कैन बी डिपॉजिटेड हियर. कंसोलिडेटेड फंड में कभी नहीं जाएगा. नहीं जाएगा. वो या तो डिजास्टर रिलीफ फंड ही सेपरेटली रहेगा, या वो इसमें भी आ सकता है. हाँ, गवर्नमेंट विल नॉट यूज दैट मनी. जनरली वहां कम आता है. वी डू नॉट गेट इनफ मनी, इसलिए वो क्वेश्चन नहीं होता है कि उधर एक्स्ट्रा चला जाए. सो पीपल डोनेट, लेट अस से 900 करोड़, 1000 करोड़ also. More than that is used in those cases, क्योंकि डिजास्टर के केस में एक्सपेंडिचर ज्यादा होता है. So for example, COVID, we got donations of 5,500, roughly, I'm rounding off the number, 5,500 crore. But the immediate expenditure of government was 30,000 crore. So इसमें क्वेश्चन ही नहीं कि वहां से कुछ बच के एक्स्ट्रा आएगा. And usually it is like that. That is why I'm saying sometimes money can come from that. So in the government budget, there are some entries, for example, NDRF allocations. Those are also for consolidated fund. उतना टेक्निकल नहीं आएगा, जितना हमने लिखा है इसी में हो जाएगा. Okay, उतना टेक्निकल आई डोंट थिंक किसी अकाउंटिंग के पेपर में पूछ सकते हैं, यहाँ नहीं आएगा. So this is all about the accounting system. Next, right? Budgetary classification. Budgetary classification of entries. Of entries you do not have to write, just simply write budgetary classification. So any entry you can classify in 4 categories. First is revenue. So revenue receipt or revenue expenditure. And similarly, 2 is capital. Capital receipt and capital expenditure. Okay, any entry can be classified like this. And इस पे at least 5 से 6 क्वेश्चन आ चुके हैं, same topic, classification. Okay, which of the following is a revenue expenditure? Okay, what is the nature of this entry? These type of questions. So ये बहुत regularly पूछा गया. 5-6 question I mean in last 20 years. So how do we identify? So write about each of them. Right. First of all, we write about the general revenue capital. Then we receipt expenditure we can directly identify. उसको बहुत हमें classify करने की भी जरूरत नहीं. So write revenue expenditure. receipts that neither increase liability so it's a negative criteria, nor liquidate assets. Clear? Under this, right, these are divided in two categories further. Or these are further divided in two categories. So, right, tax receipts, non-tax receipts. These are the two categories of revenue receipts. Now, revenue expenditure. या पहले दोनों तरह के रिसीट लिख ले. Receipts करते हैं. Okay. Next, right, capital receipt. Instead of receipt and expenditure and then receipt and expenditure, first entirely talk about receipts. Next, capital receipts. Right. Receipts. Now it is very clear. Over there we had negative criteria. Here we have positive criteria. Receipts that either create liability. So we call them debt receipts. In bracket you can write debt receipts. Or liquidate assets. Receipts that create a liability. Okay, in bracket write debt receipt. Capital receipts. Yes. अच्छा नहीं, मैंने बाद में बोला था कि receipts लिख लो पहले, आप easy रहेगा वो एक flow में. In case you have written that, correct the heading. Okay. So capital receipts we are talking about. So receipts that create liabilities. So we call them debt receipts. अच्छा मैंने ये भी इधर लिख दिया. Okay. So this is what. Debt receipts or liquidate assets. What do we call them? Non-debt capital receipts. Non-debt capital receipts. Okay, ये भी एक क्वेश्चन आ चुका है पीटी में. Non-debt capital. See, debt receipt is very clear. It can only be capital. Debt सिर्फ capital में हो सकती है. Non-debt can be of three types: tax, non-tax, and asset monetization. So इसलिए हमेशा इसको जब लिखेंगे तो इसमें लिखना पड़ेगा हमें capital receipt. Over there it was not required. That capital receipt is not required. That receipt itself clearly is capital. क्योंकि liability सिर्फ capital account में आ सकती है. So non-debt capital receipt. I hope now it is clear. Okay. So examples लिख लीजिए. Then we move to the expenditure side. Right. Tax we do not have to write example. I think very clear. Non-tax का example लिखिए. Examples. Okay. Under that first non-tax. Best example of non-tax receipt is fine, FINE, fee, challan, fine, fee, challan, examination fee, entry tickets. So for example, for this exam, you must have paid some 50 or 100 rupees to UPSC. So that is also a revenue receipt. हाँ वो free भी हो सकता है. For certain students, it is free also. But in case you are paying, that is revenue receipt. Next point. So non-tax receipt, it is clear. So there are a lot of examples here. Railways income, okay, ticket sale, everything will come here. Now, debt receipt. Example of debt receipt. Second is debt receipt. So under this, government bonds, treasury bill sale. Government bonds or treasury bill sale. From these two sources, whatever we get is debt receipt. Okay, what about post office deposits? पोस्ट ऑफिस डिपॉजिट्स क्या डेट रिसीट होंगे? नहीं होंगे। हाँ, लेकिन वो पब्लिक अकाउंट है। बजट इज स्टेटमेंट ऑफ कंसोलिडेटेड अकाउंट, सो इस अकाउंट में आती ही नहीं है। ओके, दैट्स व्हाई दे आर नॉट इवन एंटर्ड इनटू दीस अकाउंट्स। दिस इज स्टेटमेंट ऑफ कंसोलिडेटेड फंड, सो इसलिए ये कंफ्यूज मत करना। टेक्निकली वो डेट है, बट वो क्योंकि इस अकाउंट का पार्ट नहीं है तो इसलिए उसको कंसीडर नहीं करेंगे। क्लियर? सो दो ही सोर्सेज से गवर्नमेंट बोरो करती है यहाँ। दीज आर आइदर द डेटेड सिक्योरिटीज और डेटेड सिक्योरिटीज मतलब गवर्नमेंट बॉन्ड्स ऑन टी-बिल्स। नेक्स्ट, नॉन डेट कैपिटल रिसीट। एग्जांपल ऑफ नॉन डेट कैपिटल रिसीट। टैक्स इतना बड़ा टॉपिक है, उसके एग्जांपल नहीं करेंगे, उसको पूरा हम डिस्कस करेंगे इंडिपेंडेंटली। दैट्स व्हाई वी आर नॉट डिस्कसिंग एग्जांपल्स एटसेट्रा। नॉन डेट कैपिटल रिसीट। सो कैन यू गिव मी एग्जांपल? नहीं, इंटरेस्ट तो नॉन टैक्स रिसीट। इंटरेस्ट इनकम ऑफ गवर्नमेंट इज नॉन टैक्स रिसीट। ओके, लिखिए, सेल ऑफ पीएसयू शेयर्स। ओके, गवर्नमेंट sells some of the shares in a government organization, PSU. Sale of PSU shares. Next, sale of government land. Sale of government land. Next, auction of used government vehicles. Auction of used government vehicles. Clear? And anything else? The most common word we use is disinvestment. Okay, although that is covered when we use the term sale of shares. Okay, if we are selling few shares, it is minority disinvestment. If we are selling lot of shares or all the shares, then it is called strategic disinvestment. Okay, so selling of PSU shares is disinvestment. In addition to that, government can sell land. In addition to that, government auctions of lot of old material. That is also capital receipt. Last point here is, नहीं, मैं एक्सप्लेन करता हूँ, रुकिए, आपको इसमें डाउट है तो मैं एक्सप्लेन करता हूँ। एंड एनीवेज आई विल कम टू इट बिकॉज इट्स अ वेरी टेक्निकल एंट्री. Last entry here is mining rights. Mining rights. Mining rights. Call auction. Okay, coal block auction लिख लीजिए ब्रैकेट में. In bracket you can write coal block auction because it is a resource that government is selling. Now, come back to revenue receipts. Interest is always revenue receipt or revenue expenditure. If you pay interest, it is revenue expenditure. Try to think about it. हम हमेशा लोन को एक अलग एंगल से देखते हैं. We always look at the loans from a certain angle. But budget looks at loan as a service. I have taken, let us say, 10 lakh rupees from someone. On 10 lakh rupees, I'm expected to pay 1 lakh rupees interest per year. So if I keep on paying 1 lakh rupee interest per year forever, 10 lakh rupee liability will be also permanent. My liability will never get reduced if I just pay interest. So in a way, someone has given me a resource to use. Okay? जैसे हम लैंड का रेंट पे करते हैं, उसी तरह से मैं किसी का पैसा यूज कर रहा हूं और उसका एक तरीके से रेंट पे कर रहा हूं. If I'm just giving the interest, think of it like that. The budget looks at the things like that. That if you are taking money, then the interest part is the service charge for that money. वो एक सर्विस चार्ज की तरह है. इसलिए इंटरेस्ट हमेशा रेवेन्यू रिसीट में होगा because it will not reduce your liability. What is the criteria? We have very clearly written it. Either creates liability. So interest जब हम पे करते हैं, रिसीव करते हैं, वो liability नहीं create कर रहा है. Only when we take a loan it creates liability. Clear? Tax, non-tax तो अपने आप ही clear हो जाता है. That we do not have to explain. Non-tax anything which is not tax. So government land है कोई, उस पे government ने rent पे दिया है, उस पे rent income है. Remember the factors of production. There are 4 factors of production. क्या क्या है? Land, labor, entrepreneur and capital. इनसे क्या क्या इनकम होती है? Wages, rent, interest, dividend and profit. यही इनकम के सोर्सेज होते हैं. Now, government is not a worker, so wages are not applicable for government. But instead, for government, something else comes into picture, that is tax. Tax is this. Now, in factor income, anything else from tax will be non-tax income. So, government को कोई भी rent मिलेगा, government को कोई भी interest income होगी, dividend income होगी. All the government PSUs, they pay dividend. Okay, PSUs give dividend. But government undertakings, direct government, PSUs are public sector undertakings, in which government might own 100% shares also, government may own 90% shares also, but their structure is different. Their public sector undertaking means they are not directly under a government department. They are not working under a ministry. They have independent existence under Companies Act. Clear? So, जब भी कोई PSU होगी तो वो कंपनी एक्ट के अंदर एक इंडिपेंडेंट कंपनी है, and that will pay dividend to the government. वो कभी भी profit नहीं देगी government को. It will pay dividends. Government is investor, on the basis of investment will give dividend. On the other hand, companies like Railway, Indian Postal Services, or some of the other companies which are 100% government owned, and not only government owned, they come under some department. So, for example, think of ISRO. ISRO has commercial earnings by the satellite launch, but it comes under the Department of Science and Technology. That is why, in case of ISRO, it will not be dividend because it is not an independent company. All the profits of ISRO are governments. Clear? So, it is in this manner it works. So, dividend and profits are different. PSU pay dividend, government undertakings pay profits. Clear? And then interest, of course, is there. Government give loan to state government, foreign governments, they give interest. Sri Lanka को हमने loan दिया हुआ, for example. Sri Lanka gives some interest on that. Even an interest-free loan is also a minimum interest. Interest जो उस पे आएगा वो capital receipt नहीं है, that is revenue receipt. But when Sri Lanka repay the money, that will come back as capital receipt. Interest is always either revenue expenditure or receipt. अगर किसी को दे रहे हैं तो expenditure है, अगर ले रहे हैं तो receipt. Okay, interest is always revenue. Clear है? Okay, now these are all the sources of income. In addition to these, there are some other sources. और क्या income होती है हमारे पास? Can you tell me? मुझे पैसा चाहिए. For example, I'm buying a car for 20 lakh rupees. I need money for that. So I have some of my income, salary से जो मेरे पास पैसा है उसमें कुछ savings होंगी. So my savings is my first source. Okay. And then I have all these sources. मेरी जितनी भी factor income sources हैं, इन सबसे मैं पैसा, अगर मेरे पास जो भी source applicable है, मैं उस सबसे पैसा लूँगा. But after that, if I still need more money, let us say I saved 8 lakh rupees from all these sources. I use that 8 lakh rupees. What else I can use? मेरे पास एक पुरानी गाड़ी है, वो मैं अगर exchange में दे रहा हूँ, वो किस account में जाएगी? इसमें बताइए इस क्लासिफिकेशन में कहां फिट होगी? मतलब मेरा मतलब ये नहीं, कैपिटल रिसीट, क्योंकि वो एसेट मोनेटाइजेशन, ओके, सेल ऑफ एसेट है. सो पुरानी गाड़ी को बेचूंगा तो वो मेरा सेल ऑफ एसेट हो गया. अगर मैं उसके बाद लेट अस से ओल्ड कार गोस फॉर 4 लाख रुपीस, सो आई हैव 12 लाख, 8 लाख फ्रॉम ऑल दिस, 4 लाख ओल्ड कार. अभी भी कहां से पैसा आ सकता है? लेट अस से माय फादर गिव्स मी 2 लाख रुपीस, लोन से आएगा, लोन से आएगा. आई एम कीपिंग दैट फॉर लास्ट. I'm requiring you to think about alternatives. बीच में क्या बच सकता है? Money can still come from transfers. Okay, so government can receive donations. Government can receive transfer income. That will come in revenue, non-tax. ठीक है? तो let us say my father gives me 2 lakh rupees. Then remaining 6 lakh I can take a loan. So that will be capital. Okay, so old car sale and that loan is capital receipt. And my income is my own factor income, that is revenue. And if I transfer, I get from someone I know. Okay, they give me gift, that is also revenue. So यही सब sources होंगे हमारे. I hope now things are clear. Clear? So with this example, you have looked at every type of entry here. Clear? So all the receipts can be classified into these 4 categories. Tax receipt, non-tax receipt, which both are revenue receipts, और debt receipt, which is very clear, loan लिया है तो debt receipt, और कुछ बेचा है तो वो non-debt capital receipt. Okay, if we are selling something old, that is non-debt capital receipt. So sale of goods से जो income होती है वो कहाँ आती है बताइए? Sale of goods revenue होगा. ये confusing entry है, that's why I asked. Sale of goods कहा है मैंने, not capital assets. Okay, so if government is producing something, sale purchase से government profit earn कर सकते हैं, it will come into the profit category. Sale of goods create profits. So government directly आपको कुछ भी बेच रही है. For example, let us say government, एक example जहाँ government हमें directly कुछ sell करती हो. Can you give me one example? Of course, I will give you. But in any case, government, we buy something directly from government. कुछ भी ऐसा जो directly government से purchase करते हैं. खादी, yes, good example. So खादी है जिसे खादी के केस में सेल ऑफ गुड है, तो वो कौन सा इनकम होगा गवर्नमेंट का? वो रेवेन्यू इनकम है, रेवेन्यू रिसीव। गुड्स एसेट नहीं होते, बस इसी का ही डाउट है वो। गुड्स आर नॉट एसेट्स। मुझे 1 मिनट दीजिए, आई हैव टू टेक ए कॉल। Okay, so the receipt classification is clear to us. वो मैं भी कराऊंगा। वो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल क्लासिफिकेशन आपके नोट्स में फिर स्मूथ रहने दीजिए। आई विल कम टू इट, व्हाट इज एसेट, व्हाट इज नॉट एसेट, आई विल कम टू। सो राइट, नेक्स्ट इज एक्सपेंडिचर। ओके, कीप दिस क्वेश्चन इन माइंड इन केस आई डू नॉट टॉक अबाउट इट, आप मुझसे पूछ लेंगे। ओके, व्हाट आर एसेट्स बेसिकली, आप व्हाट डू वी मीन बाय एसेट्स, दैट आई विल कवर। एक मिनट दीजिए, ये थोड़े अर्जेंट कॉल्स हैं, समथिंग अर्जेंट। हेलो, हाँ अंशुम। अच्छा, ठीक है। तो अंशुमन, एक काम करो ना, मेरी सर से बात हुई थी, वो कह रहे थे एक तो नाम नहीं डालना है इसमें किसी को, नाम तो वो अपने आप भर लेंगे इसमें बाद में। तो सिर्फ अपने बेसिस पे जो तुम्हारे पास रफ इंफॉर्मेशन भी है ना, वो भी दे सकते हो। बहुत हाँ। नहीं, एक्यूरेट नहीं चाहिए, बिल्कुल एक्यूरेट नहीं चाहिए ना, वो उतना एक्सपेक्ट करते हैं। तो क्लोज भी होगा तो इट्स गुड इनफ। ये किसी डिपार्टमेंट मिनिस्ट्री को लेके कॉल था, सो इस वजह से आई कुडंट पुट इट डाउन. So person I was talking to was in charge of Ram Mandir construction in Ayodhya. और उनको एक डॉक्यूमेंट भरना है और उसको रिलेटेड कुछ किसी इंफॉर्मेशन का. एनीवेज, कमिंग टू we were talking about expenditure. Okay, so right, revenue expenditure, right, which does not create assets, or or remove liability, which does not create asset or remove/reduce liability. Okay, now we'll write a lot of examples which will make everything very clear here. Write examples. First example, salary, pensions. Okay, salary, pensions. Okay. Second, grants, transfers, subsidies. None of these are creating assets. Okay, ना ही ये खर्च से हमारी कोई liability कम हो रही है. We are not paying off any liability. So that is the criteria. You will never get your question wrong if you go by this criteria. कभी भी गलत नहीं होगा question. This is the criteria we should look into. Okay. Next example. This is now relatively tricky one. Centers transfer to state. Centers transfer to states. Okay. This is also revenue expenditure because it is transfer. Technically, every transfer is revenue expenditure. Now, what is interesting is states use this transfer for asset development. इससे होगा asset development, but हमें इसको revenue account में लिखना पड़ेगा. For center, it will revenue. हाँ, ये इसका technical aspect है. Next, maintenance. Okay. And upkeep of government assets. Now, this is also an entry related to assets, but this is still a revenue expenditure. Okay, there is a government building which is an asset, but उस government building का जो maintenance है वो revenue expenditure है. Okay, for example, Delhi University is a government building, and every year on the maintenance of Delhi University we spend 600 crore. Now, those 600 crore rupees are revenue expenditure. Clear? So maintenance, upkeep of assets. नहीं, डेप्रिसिएशन अलग चीज है. डेप्रिसिएशन गवर्नमेंट के केस में हम जनरली इंक्लूड नहीं करते इस तरह से. ओके, डेप्रिसिएशन इज एन अकाउंटिंग प्रैक्टिस, बट मैंने गवर्नमेंट बजटिंग में कभी देखा नहीं है इसे. ओके, एंड बिकॉज आई हैव नेवर सीन इट, आई हैव नेवर आल्सो थॉट इट फ्रॉम दैट एंगल एज वेल. मैंने कभी देखा भी नहीं, इसलिए उस एंगल से कभी सोचा नहीं. आई विल सर्च फॉर इट. मैं स्टिल देखता हूं अगर कहीं होता है तो. नेक्स्ट, नाउ यू कैन टेल मी मोर एग्जांपल्स ऑफ रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर. गवर्नमेंट स्कीम्स, ये भी टेक्निकल है. लास्ट जो हमने तीनों एंट्री लिखी है इसमें स्टूडेंट्स मिस्टेक करते हैं. स्टूडेंट्स मेक अ लॉट ऑफ मिस्टेक्स इन दिस. व्हाई? बिकॉज इन द प्रीवियस एंट्री देयर वाज एसेट मेंशन. वो टेक्निकली पढ़ेंगे नहीं पूरा, बस एसेट देख लिया तो मतलब कैपिटल अकाउंट. यहां पे क्या प्रॉब्लम है? स्कीम्स आर इन टू कैटेगरी. स्कीम्स कैन कम इन कैपिटल एज वेल एज रेवेन्यू. सो इन विच कैटेगरी दो स्कीम्स आर देयर? सो विच टाइप ऑफ स्कीम्स? राइट इन ब्रैकेट, center sponsored schemes. So these are revenue expenditure. और एक और मेजर कैटेगरी होती है स्कीम्स की, सेंटर सेक्टर स्कीम. ओके, यहां मत लिखो, वो कैपिटल में है. वो यही होती है सेंटर स्पॉन्सर्ड, जिसमें स्टेट को पैसा देते हैं. दीज आर द वंस. सो कैन यू टेल मी, एग्जाम में ऐसे भी नहीं पूछते हैं, एग्जाम में बड़ा अच्छा क्वेश्चन पूछते हैं. इन एग्जामिनेशन दे विल आस्क यू व्हिच ऑफ द फॉलोइंग इज रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर. ऐसा क्वेश्चन आया और उसमें ऑप्शंस क्या आएंगे? स्वच्छ भारत मिशन. देन दे विल गिव यू, लेट अस से, सागर माला परियोजना. Okay, and then they give you, let us say, some education, सर्व शिक्षा अभियान, and something else. Okay, now tell me, इसमें से क्या क्या revenue expenditure है? None of them. सर्व शिक्षा अभियान कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर में जाता है एक्चुअली, क्योंकि वो ह्यूमन कैपिटल डेवलपमेंट का एक्सपेंडिचर है और वो एक एक्सेप्शन है। ओके, ये इतनी टेक्निकल एंट्री है। स्वच्छ भारत अभियान में हम टॉयलेट्स बना रहे हैं, उनको भी एसेट माना जाता है। देखिए, तो एग्जाम, अब मैंने जो आपको लिखा है, फिर आपको लगेगा कि इसमें से क्वेश्चन नहीं आया। सो स्कीम्स किस कैटेगरी में जा रही है, उससे क्या हो रहा है, वो आपको एक बार देखना पड़ेगा। ओके, सेक्टर स्कीम और स्पॉन्सर स्कीम, इनकी लिस्ट एक बार आप देखिए। ओके, एंड देन मैप देम, क्योंकि इस एंगल से भी पूछा जा सकता है। बी वेरी क्लियर अबाउट स्वच्छ भारत। सर्व शिक्षा को मैं एक बार क्रॉस चेक कर सकता हूं। ओके, देयर इज लेट अस से 1% चांस कि अगर मुझसे कोई मिस्टेक हो रहा है अगर सर्व शिक्षा अभियान में। हाँ, वो है तो कैपिटल ही, मैं मुझे डाउट नहीं है, बट एजुकेशन की कई स्कीम्स कैपिटल में है, कई रेगुलर है, सो दैट्स व्हाई मैं एक बार उस, लेकिन ये बड़ा क्लियर है, स्वच्छ भारत इज वेरी क्लियरली कैपिटल, क्योंकि टॉयलेट बिल्डिंग इज एसेट। ठीक है, और सागरमाला में तो डाउट ही नहीं है किसी को। सो क्वेश्चन आर इन दिस मैनर। कैन यू गिव मी अदर एग्जांपल if there is something you can think of in revenue expenditure? Okay, defense भी एक बड़ी टेक्निकल एंट्री है। ओके, सो डिफेंस कम्स इन टू कैटेगरी, डिफेंस सैलरीज, डिफेंस मेंटेनेंस। हाँ, डिफेंस अगर सिर्फ डिफेंस लिखा है तो वो रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर है, लेकिन अगर डिफेंस प्रोक्योरमेंट लिखा है तो वो कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर है। सो ये सब टेक्निकल एंट्रीज है। सो डिफेंस मेंटेनेंस, डिफेंस सैलरीज, पेंशंस, ओआरओपी, एवरीथिंग दैट इज रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर। नाउ राइट कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर, कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर। So, right, in the capital expenditure, first of all, the criteria: creates assets or reduce liability, reduce or remove liability. Create assets or reduce or remove liability. So very clearly, first entry is center sector schemes, because all of these create assets. Center sector schemes. Okay, for example, Swachh Bharat, Sagarmala. For example, Swachh Bharat, Sagarmala. Hempuja, आपने electricity लिखा है. Electricity comes in capital expenditure usually. Now we can only answer clearly if if there is more detail. Okay, but electricity में जो rarely इलेक्ट्रिसिटी के जो एसेट्स हैं उनका मेंटेनेंस तो रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर है, बट क्रिएशन ऑफ एनी फर्दर कैपेसिटी कैपिटल। एनीवेज, दिस इज क्लियर। सो दिस इज द बिगेस्ट कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर। फिर क्या आएगा इसमें? गिव न्यू लोन्स, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर इसी में आ जाता है। इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर की सारी स्कीम सेंटर सेक्टर स्कीम्स। लेकिन अनदर एंट्री वेयर पीपल गेट इट रॉन्ग इज गिविंग लोन्स टू स्टेट्स और अदर कंट्रीज। Giving loans to states or other. Okay, you said in context of goods. Yes. अच्छा, ठीक है. Where we buy something directly from government. हाँ, services के केस में. Yes. I'll just come to that. Purchase of an asset भी ठीक होगा, but अभी इसी की बात करते हैं. Let us talk about this entry. Why it is in capital account? Can you explain? When we are giving loan to someone, why it is capital expenditure? Yes, exactly. Because a loan that you give to someone else is asset. It gives you earning. That's why. You've heard the term NPA, non-performing asset, loans which are not coming back. Okay, so वो non-performing है, but otherwise that means loans are performing assets. So these are assets, and because we are creating assets, this is capital. Okay, so it is within the criteria that we have written. Anything we are discussing is within this criteria: create asset or reduce liability. अब reduce liability की बात करते हैं. How we can reduce liability? Repayment of loans. Repayment of loans. They will pay back the principal that is considered as capital. बिल्कुल ठीक है, भीम पूजा, आपका आंसर clear? Anything else that come into capital account? लिखिए, क्रिएशन ऑफ न्यू पीएसयूज, लास्ट एंट्री। सब कुछ सरकारी स्कीम में नहीं होता, देयर कैन बी कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर आउटसाइड इट। सो क्रिएशन ऑफ न्यू गवर्नमेंट फैक्ट्रीज, पीएसयूज, अंडरटेकिंग्स, okay, all of these are what? Investments which create assets. That's right. So creation of new factories, companies, anything will come in this category. Okay, if government takes over new land or something, that will also be capital expenditure. Okay, purchase of land by government. इसका एग्जाम इसको लिखते कैसे? I mean, what is the correct term for this purchase of land? Land acquisition. Okay. So land acquisition is also capital expenditure. And what else? Defense procurement. Last entry. Defense procurement. So for example, purchase of Tejas, Rafale, Intas, rifles, etc. These are all procurement. Okay. If we go into deeper, military can be very, very technical. क्या revenue है and क्या capital है. But हमारे exam में उतना technical नहीं आएगा. What we have written is good enough. So for example, bullet is revenue. The gun is capital. Okay. So उतना technical भी हो सकता है. The uniform is capital. Washing of uniform is revenue. Anyways, this is clear. ये complete हो गया हमारा. This topic is complete. All the criteria we have done. Now, what you need to do is find some practice questions, past year questions, और उन पे आप practice कीजिए. I can provide you a set to practice. Okay, मैं इस पे आपको एक set दे दूँगा practice के लिए. हाँ, मैं आपको provide कराऊँगा. I will give you. First of all, I will give you PYQ, which are topic wise segregated. ठीक है? तो इस topic में मैं आपको at least PYQ आज ही भेज देता हूँ. Okay? आप तक हो सकता है कल आए, but within the group here, I will send today. Okay? And क्योंकि शायद उनको फॉर्मेटिंग करनी पड़ेगी अपने स्ट्रक्चर में, सो मे बी दे विल टेक वन डे. और इस पे एक्स्ट्रा प्रैक्टिस क्वेश्चन जो है वो भी मैं आपको प्रोवाइड करा दूंगा, बट फॉर दैट वी हैव टू वेट फॉर सम टाइम. नाउ मूविंग फॉरवर्ड, नेक्स्ट टॉपिक इज फिस्कल पॉलिसी. Budget is not 100% complete, but the basic classification, basic terms we have discussed, some of them. After that we discuss tax, but first fiscal policy. Right, fiscal policy deals with budgetary decisions usually. Deals with budgetary decisions usually. It includes. Okay, now write the tools of fiscal policy. So it includes, now there is a list, and this list is basically the tools of fiscal policy. So first is new tax, then change in tax rate, new tax or change in tax rate. What are we doing with that? New tax. Okay. चलिए एक बार लिस्ट कंप्लीट करते हैं, then I will go one by one because sometimes this creates, I mean, scattered notes. Let us first complete the tools, then I will talk one by one. 1 and 2, this. Third, apart from tax, what else can be there? Yes, expenditure is there, but first a very specific tool that we use in fiscal policy is subsidy. Okay. Subsidy. Again, change in subsidy or new subsidy, both options are there. Okay. We do not have to write this everywhere. Okay. Yes. Then apart from subsidy, government expenditure, as you said. Other government expenditure. Okay. So government expenditure के context में ही मैं बात कर रहा था. I was talking in the beginning of session that Nirmala Sitharaman argued we have to spend more money, but how we spend money matters a lot. We spend this money just to give subsidies to people. It will have lower impact on growth. Instead, we use that expenditure on infrastructure that has much higher impact on growth. So what is this? This is very technical use of fiscal policy, what she was talking about. Okay. So government expenditure other than subsidy. Subsidy, of course, are mentioned earlier. Subsidies are very effective and, the fastest tool to work. The impact of capital expenditure is very slow. So you cannot just opt for that. Even this is what Nirmala Sitharaman was also arguing, that we have two options. One is to give transfer, other is to spend on capital expenditure. Capital expenditure will give you return after 1 year. So we can't just opt for capital expenditure, because nobody will get return and dissatisfaction will prevail. And it will also not revive the economy right now. That is why we need a mix. Initially, more of subsidy, less of other expenditure, and eventually we will keep decreasing subsidy and increasing capital expenditure, because then my earlier expenditure will start showing results. Okay, so let us say we are working on 3-year agenda, 1, 2, and 3. I'm just giving you an example right now how we are working. So 2021, 22, 23. So in 2020, we are making a decision. So what are we doing? In the first year, we give more of subsidy. Subsidy give you result in the year 1 itself. The year 1 capital expenditure, which was, let us say, half of it. Half this, half this. From this half, we got result this year. From this half, we get result in second year. And this year, 80% is capital expenditure. Only 20% is subsidy. And then this 80 give you much bigger result in third year. So that is how we are working. Itna technical nahi aayega exam mein, but still, I'm just talking about how things can work. This is pure fiscal policy technical. Okay. So subsidy and government expenditure. Anything else that come in fiscal policy, can you tell me? No. Inflation is impact of this. These will create inflation or reduce inflation. In some inflation को control करेंगे. Inflation is objective, not a tool. Okay, वो objective है. There are objectives of fiscal policy also, which I will talk about next. Tools में एक और चीज है बस. This I want to talk about. Just think about it. Take your time. एक बार सोचिए क्या हो सकता है. हाँ, government expenditure में capital or revenue, everything we have covered. Okay. This can be classified into capex and revenue expenditure. We are talking about only expenditure. आप अभी तक revenues की बात नहीं कर रहे. Okay. Borrowing, हाँ tool है, but borrowing is not. ठीक है, लिख सकते हैं. I mean, you can write borrowing. Borrowing, ठीक है, fair enough. You can write borrowing. Revenues में क्या pending है अभी? Tax is there, capital is there. Capital में और क्या था? Disinvestment. Disinvestment is also a tool of fiscal policy. Okay. Disinvestment is what I was trying to talk about. Borrowing and disinvestment. Non-tax receipts are also there. You can mention them, but they are not significant. Non-tax receipts are not that significant. Significant are first 3, 4. These are the most significant tools. Rest are relatively less significant. Okay. Now let us talk about tax. Okay. So right, next is tax, which will cover both 1 and 2. Right, tax. Under that, right, direct tax. Okay, there are 2 types of tax. So what if we change the direct tax or introduce a new direct tax? One is tax under that A, direct tax. Okay, for example, STT, security transaction tax is introduced. For example, STT, security transaction tax is introduced. So what is the impact on people? What is the impact? What do we want from that?
If the tax burden that you provide, yes, pay the tax to.
Okay, fair. How do we write it exactly? Like, any tax serve 2 purposes. Any tax serve 2 purposes. Creation of revenue. Creation of revenue. या तो वो revenue create करेगा. Secondly, discourage the consumption. 5 minutes. Discourage the consumption. Okay. So a direct tax will discourage the consumption by reduction of income. Okay. Under this, right? Direct tax discourage consumption by reduction in income. We are right now talking about increase in tax or new tax. Opposite impact will be there when we are reducing the tax rate. Then it will be a positive impact. It will encourage the demand. What will happen in the case of indirect tax? B, indirect tax. What if we are introducing new indirect tax? First point is same, creation of revenue. Second point is where we have small difference. B, discouragement of consumption due to, you have to answer, discouragement of consumption due to, ऐसे नहीं लिखेंगे, बट वो तो उस तरह से दोनों को लिख सकते हैं. What is the specific impact? Due to increase in price. Due to increase in price. Tax burden can be in two forms. It reduces your income or increase price. Clear? So indirect taxes increase the price. I hope this is clear. So that is how tax affect. And in fiscal policy we can have multiple objective. हमें कभी-कभी tax इसलिए लगाना पड़ता है because government needs money. Number of times we introduce a tax just to discourage consumption of something. Okay? For example, you can write example here. For example, sin goods, SIN, sin goods like cigarettes are excessively taxed to discourage consumption. Are excessively taxed to discourage consumption. Same for alcohol. Alcohol is also excessively taxed. We don't have to write separately. That is also one of the sin goods. So there are many products whose price can become a fraction if there are no taxes on them or normal taxes on them. Cigarette, maybe a cigarette costs you about 20 rupees. Okay. If we reduce the taxes on that, if we have normal GST like on other products, cigarette, if it is 20 rupees today, it may become 7-8 rupees. Okay. In a cigarette, about 15 rupees or 14 rupees are tax. If we have a normal 2 to 3 rupee tax on it, the price will be 6 to 7 rupee or 8 rupee. Same for alcohol. A bottle which sell in market for 800 rupees, okay, that may cost to the wholesaler around only 200 rupees. Okay, and that is the whole this Delhi excise policy debate is about. Okay, Manish Sisodia, the Delhi's deputy chief minister, he is in prison also for 1 year, exactly 1 year, last year 26th of Feb. Okay? And why is not even getting bail? Because this is documented. Okay, so they played around with these taxes. So, anyways. इतना ज्यादा टैक्स होता है, that's what I'm trying to say. Why this is there? Purpose income generate करना भी है, but that is secondary purpose. The major purpose is this: discourage consumption. So you can have tax for two purposes: discourage consumption or encourage consumption. Okay. एक point और लिख लीजिए, next paragraph. Similarly, taxes can be reduced to encourage consumption. Reduce जब भी करेंगे उसका एक ही reason होगा. Then हमारा purpose नहीं होता है कि income कम की जाए. Reduction is always to encourage consumption. Be very clear. Similarly, we can reduce the taxes to encourage consumption or demand/demand. We can reduce the taxes to encourage consumption or demand. Okay. So, for example, electric cars. For example, electric cars. Okay. So on these we reduce the taxes. Okay, because we want to encourage their consumption, encourage their sale. Similarly, there are many other products like that. Okay, solar panels. The taxes on them are negligible. In addition, we give subsidy also. So, abhi clear hai? What is the fiscal policy impact of tax? Either it can be increased to encourage income and discourage consumption. On the other hand, taxes can be reduced to encourage consumption or demand. So these are the purposes. Similarly, subsidy. You can write on your own. Subsidy will be same as reduction in tax. Okay, it will be there just to encourage the demand in the target group. Right? Similarly, next point. Now we can write things in one line each. Similarly, subsidy can encourage consumption in the target group. Subsidy can encourage consumption in target groups or in general. There can be targeted subsidies, there can be general subsidies. Target group, targeted subsidy का example, can you give me? नहीं, MSP subsidy नहीं है. It's not a subsidy. Fertilizer. For example, fertilizer, urea. To be specific, write urea. कह सकते हैं, but urea is better example actually. क्योंकि वो targeted का मैंने पूछा आपसे. Water electricity जहां भी मिल रहा है वो general मिल रहा है. Okay. Clear? So we want farmers to get urea at cheaper price and increase the use of urea. But we do not want to make urea cheaper for other industries which also use urea as a raw material. So in pharmaceuticals, urea is used as raw material. In many other industries, it is used as raw material. So there can be targeted subsidies, non-targeted, general subsidies. So purpose of subsidy is very clear: increase income. Oh, sorry, increase demand. Next, capital expenditure. इसका क्या इम्पैक्ट होता है? कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर के 2-3 इम्पैक्ट होते हैं. Under this slide, A, create jobs. This is the biggest benefit of this. Creates jobs or employment. Okay? Whenever we spend on infrastructure or whenever we spend on power, we will hire a lot of people to create those assets as well. So that is why it creates direct jobs. Okay? And then another good thing about it is demand for other industries, creates demand for other industries. Create demand for other industries. Okay, if government is investing in infrastructure, let us say power, then all the type of electrical equipments, cables, their demand will also increase. Government will buy that from PSUs, private sector. So they automatically get a boost. So directly हम demand बढ़ाते हैं. Whereas in all other cases, we create indirect demand for the private sector. We give people income, they will go and create demand in market. यहाँ हम directly demand बढ़ा रहे हैं. Okay, this is the difference. And that is why there is multiplier impact here. We are creating jobs, we are creating raw material demand. Okay. So what else is there in capital expenditure? Indirect demand. Infrastructure is an example of it. We're talking about impacts. Direct demand, indirect demand, okay, and jobs. These are the 3 impacts. वही तो demand consumption. हाँ. Directly demand बढ़ेगी, indirectly demand बढ़ेगी. Okay, we are generating income also for people through employment, indirect demand. हाँ, growth of course. इसी का growth and employment is same thing. Whenever we are saying employment increase, that means growth increase. लेकिन इसकी जगह अगर हम जनरल गवर्नमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर बढ़ाएं, लोगों को इनकम ज्यादा दें, लेट अस से गवर्नमेंट हायर मोर पीपल इन द गवर्नमेंट जॉब्स, इट विल क्रिएट एम्प्लॉयमेंट बट इट विल नॉट क्रिएट डायरेक्ट डिमांड. ओके, उसका मल्टीप्लायर कम होता है. ओके, हाँ, रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर बढ़ाना जो है उसका इंपैक्ट, हाँ, क्योंकि कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर तो लिखा है, बाकी का रेवेन्यू ही होगा. रेवेन्यू मींस एक तो सब्सिडी, अदर देन सब्सिडी व्हाट इट इज द अदर एक्सपेंडिचर्स. लेट अस से गवर्नमेंट क्रिएट 5 लाख न्यू जॉब्स. Okay, government create other type of direct revenue expenditure. तो उसका impact क्या होगा? उससे jobs create नहीं होंगे. हो सकते हैं, I mean, we are creating job, then of course jobs will also be created. और लेकिन उससे raw material demand create नहीं होगा. Okay, so still capital expenditure is superior to every other expenditure. That's why. So this is also covered. Borrowing, right? Next. Right? Borrowing is a very strategic and useful tool. Borrowing is not bad, by the way. Borrowing is a very strategic and useful tool. TDPS, rise in goods price. Targeted, हाँ, ठीक है, आपका एग्जाम्पल लेकर शुरू. Anyways, what was the last point I was talking about? Strategic. नहीं, उससे पहले क्या बोला? Just I'll just the contracts here. Borrowing is not bad. It is a strategic tool. Borrowing is a strategic tool. So, right, for example, even the top companies, like Reliance, Tata, borrow for financing investment. Even the top companies like Reliance or Tata borrow for financing investment. Comma, similarly, government can use it as a development tool. So government can also utilize this as development tool. Similarly, government can also use it as a development tool. Government can use it as development tool. Okay, so later we'll talk about it under FRBM Act, how we can use it as a development tool. It can be misused, it can be used as development tool. So we have to be using it very carefully. You can write in bracket, FRBM Act guides how to utilize it effectively. FRBM Act guides how to utilize it effectively. Next, disinvestment. Right. In urgent requirement, government can sell assets. Government can sell assets. Productive assets, however, must not be sold. Okay, profit making, productive assets, however, must not be sold. So if you have to sell, you have to sell the loss making or the lower category assets. This is the only thing that we have to be careful about. And non-tax receipts, ये बहुत important tool नहीं है. Okay, so what about it? Right, non-tax receipts. In Indian context, these are underutilized. In Indian context, these are underutilized. And we can utilize them better for revenue generation. So इसका purpose एक ही है, revenue generation करना. We can utilize them better for revenue generation. This can also reduce tax burden. This can also reduce tax burden on people and boost economic growth. This can also reduce tax burden on people and boost economic growth. And boost economic growth. You have to answer me this last point. Okay, this is where we are ending the session, but this last point you have to explain. बताइए, economic growth कैसे boost होगी इससे? If we are able to increase it, how it can boost economic growth?
So basically, in the tax receipts, most of the time it's distortions, most of the burden is on the consumer. But if these are like non-tax receipts, there will be less burden on consumers. It will create less distortion because it will focus.
Distortion वाला point यहाँ नहीं आएगा. Distortion वाला point इससे related नहीं है. Distortion is something else. I'll talk about it, but यहाँ नहीं relevant है. Simple answer is आप बहुत close हो answer के, you're just not clicking it. Okay? You got into correct direction. The point is आपने सही line भी बोली है that it will reduce burden on consumer. When it will reduce burden on consumer, because if we are able to increase them, we can reduce taxes. And if tax burden reduces, demand will increase, and that will encourage growth. Okay? So you almost answered actually. Okay. So this is where we end. We have written all the tools of fiscal policy. We will talk about some of the taxes, some of their factual details in little more detail tomorrow. Again, this topic we will complete, and we'll also begin most probably with the financial system tomorrow. Okay. Definitely this topic will be completed. If possible, I will try fiscal policy should also start tomorrow. Not fiscal policy, sorry, the financial markets.
Introducing the Prelims Target course and Prelims Test Series at ProdEgyIAS. Designed for UPSC Prelims 2026, this comprehensive program offers in-depth classes on history, geography, science and tech, environment, polity and governance, and economy. Stay updated with current affairs and sharpen your skills with our Prelims Test Series consisting of 50 full-length tests covering all subjects along with CSAT. Join ProdEgyIAS and stay ahead.